I wish my mom would just disappear. That's what I heard him say. My own son, Thomas. He said it in the foyer of the house I brought him home to as a baby, thinking I was gone. They thought I was at physical therapy. But my therapist, bless her heart, caught the flu and had to cancel. Thomas and his wife Brenda didn't know. They thought the house was empty for at least 2 hours. But I was right there, resting in the parlor. My name is Alice Sinclair, and I am 80 years old. When you get to be my age, you don't measure life in years anymore. You measure it in the seasons you've seen pass by this very window. I've seen 60 of them in this house, the one my late husband Frank designed down to the last brick. I've been recovering from a fractured hip for 6 months. It's slow going. But my mind... Oh, my mind is as sharp as it ever was. Sharper, maybe. Thomas and Brenda seem to have forgotten that. I heard Brenda's sigh right after. She told him if I'd just sell this house and go to that Riverbend place, they could finally put a down payment on their lake house. I wasn't a mother. I was an obstacle. I grabbed my cane, and the wood clicked hard on the oak floor. I pulled myself up. I walked right out of the parlor. Disappear, Thomas? Their faces. Well, that was the real beginning of this story. The moment I realized my fight wasn't with my hip, it was with my own family. This is the story of how they tried to declare me fragile, not confused. How they tried to use my age against me, and how they learned that this old woman has more steel in her spine than they have greed in their hearts. I need to tell someone. If you'll listen, I'd be honored to have the company. Please subscribe, because I'm going to tell you exactly what happened next. You would think that after being caught, after saying something so cold-blooded, there would be, I don't know, shame? An apology? No, that's not what happens when greed gets its hooks in. Thomas froze, yes. Brenda's hand flew to her mouth and her face went as white as a sheet. But my son, Thomas, he recovered in a second. That's the Sinclair in him, I suppose. Though Frank, my husband, always used his quickness for good. Thomas, he just uses it. He didn't say, I'm sorry, Mom. He didn't say, I didn't mean it. He rushed toward me, his face twisting into that awful mask of fake concern. Mom, you're not at therapy? You shouldn't be walking around by yourself. See? This is exactly what we're talking about. What if you'd fallen again? This house is a hazard. Do you see what he did? He turned it. He took the ugliest thing he could say and tried to pretend it came from a place of love. He tried to make me the one in the wrong for overhearing his betrayal. I am perfectly capable of walking in my own home, Thomas, I said. My voice didn't shake. I was proud of that. Brenda, still speechless, just started wringing her hands. She couldn't even look me in the eye. We're just worried, Thomas insisted, his voice getting louder, like that would make it true. This place is too much for you. We just want you to be safe. Safe. That's the word they use when they mean convenient. When they want to put you in a box on a shelf so they can go on with their lives without the bother of remembering you have one of your own. They left soon after that. The silence in this house, after they slammed the front door, was louder than any argument. It was a cold, empty sound. I sat in my chair, the one Frank always said was the best in the house, and I just sat. For the first time, my fractured hip wasn't the thing that made me feel old. It was that look in my son's eyes, that look of impatience, the look of someone who is just waiting. But I was wrong. They weren't just waiting. 3 days later, the real campaign began. I came downstairs for my morning tea. I move slow these days. I use my cane, but I get there. The kitchen has been my domain for 56 years. I know where every pot, every spoon, every spice jar is. Frank built me those shelves himself in 1978. But that morning, I couldn't find my favorite teapot, the little blue one I bought with my mother ages ago. It wasn't on the low shelf where it always sits. I looked up. Brenda had been here. She'd reorganized. That's what she called it when she came back. all smiles, later that day. "I just tidied up for you, Alice," she'd chirped, patting my hand. "Made things safer." Safer. There was that word again. My teapot was on the top shelf, the one I couldn't possibly reach without a step stool. And using a step stool with this hip is out of the question. All my heavy-bottomed pans, the ones I use every single day to make my soup, moved to the bottom cabinets so I'd have to bend and kneel, something they knew I couldn't do. My coffee mugs? Pushed to the back of a high cupboard, behind the fancy china we only use at Christmas. She had replaced my accessible, everyday items with things I never used. She had made my own kitchen impossible for me. I just stood there, looking at my teapot. It might as well have been on the moon. I understood then. This wasn't concern, this wasn't help, this was a strategy. They were trying to create the very frailty they accused me of. They were building a case. They wanted me to be helpless. They wanted me to be so tired of struggling in my own home that I would just give up. I looked at that teapot, and I felt a cold anger settle in my chest. It felt a lot like the steel rod the surgeon put in my hip. They thought they could just move my things. They thought they could rearrange my life until it fit their plans. That's when I knew this wasn't just a fight for my house. It was a fight for my life. My real life, not the one they were trying to pack into a single room at Riverbend. They weren't just waiting for me to fall. They were starting to push. Being angry is one thing. It's a fire. It keeps you warm for a minute. But being smart, that's different. That's a low-burning coal. It lasts. I knew what they were doing. But knowing and proving are two different roads. And in my 80 years, I've learned you don't win a war by shouting. You win it by knowing the battlefield better than your enemy. My battlefield was this house. My weapons were the things they overlooked. My memory, my records, and the fact that I've paid the bills for this family since 1968. I started small. I waited until Brenda's next visit. She came by with a pot of watery soup, telling me I shouldn't be fiddling with the stove. I just smiled. I told her, "Brenda, dear, you're a saint, but I'm so tired. I think I'll just have a little nap." The second I heard her car pull out of the driveway, I went to work. They thought I was weak because of my hip, but they forgot about my hands. These hands filed every tax return, every mortgage statement, every utility bill for 50 years. Frank was the architect. I was the accountant. I went to the study, Frank's old desk. It's not a place they'd ever think to look. They don't read books unless they're on a bestseller list. I started with the mail. I've been meticulous about my mail my whole life. I noticed the stack had been a little light since my fall. Thomas had helpfully offered to grab it for me on his way in. Now I knew why. But they're sloppy. See, that's the thing about young people in a hurry. They're so focused on the next thing, they don't pay attention to the now. Tucked inside the shopper's circular, I found it. It was a letter addressed to Thomas Sinclair, executor. Executor, I'm not dead yet, last I checked. It was from a local realtor, a man named Pace, a name I didn't know. It wasn't a planning letter, it was a confirmation. Dear Mr. Sinclair, it read, following our conversation, I have prepared the preliminary market analysis for 1200 Oakwood Drive. As you requested, I focused on a quick sale scenario. A quick sale. He wasn't just giving a look. He wasn't planning for insurance. My son had hired a realtor to sell my house out from under me. The phrase, "as you requested," echoed in my head. He was the one pushing, not Brenda. Oh, she was happy to go along, but this was his greed. I sat there, holding that piece of paper, and the blood in my veins felt like ice. But then, I found the real poison. I keep a locked file cabinet. Always have. It's where Frank and I kept the important things. The deed, our wills, the stock certificates, our marriage license. The key has been on my person, on a chain around my neck, since the day Frank passed. They'd have to take it off my dead body. I opened the bottom drawer, where my will, the real will, was supposed to be. The folder was there, but the document inside. It wasn't the will Frank and I signed together in 2010. It was a new one, dated just 3 months ago, right after my fall. It was a durable power of attorney, giving Thomas Sinclair complete and total control over my finances and my medical decisions, effective immediately. His signature was there, and next to it was mine. Except it wasn't. Not really. It was shaky. It was weak. It looked like the signature of a woman addled on pain medication in a hospital bed who'd been told she was just signing a release form. I remembered, vaguely, a nurse, a stack of papers, Thomas, his hand on my shoulder. "It's just to make sure we can talk to the doctors, Mom. Just sign here." They hadn't just tried to make me seem fragile. They had used my moment of fragility to try and steal my entire life, my name, my legacy. They thought they had won. They thought the house was as good as sold. They thought I was just a senile old woman rattling around in a house too big for her. They forgot who I am. I am Alice Sinclair. I am the woman who ran this house, this family, and this budget for half a century. I survived the 70s. I survived losing Frank. I am not going to be erased by my impatient, greedy child. I took the new key to my desk drawer, the one they didn't know I had. I took out my checkbook. These old hands, they knew exactly how to sign a check. And I knew exactly who I was going to call. They think I'm too old to fight? I'm just old enough to know exactly how to win. The next few days, I played the part they had written for me. I became the very picture of a frail, slightly confused old woman. When Brenda came by, I'd thank her, my voice a little weaker, for that awful, watery soup she kept bringing. I'd ask her where she'd put the good blankets, pretending I'd forgotten she'd moved them to the attic for the summer, even though it was October. She would pat my hand, that condescending little pat, and tell me not to worry my head about it. She'd take care of everything. She thought I was declining. I was preparing. Thomas would call, his voice dripping with that false, booming cheerfulness. He'd ask how I was feeling, if I was managing all right in that big old house. I'd sigh. I'd tell him the stairs were getting so hard. And I'd nearly dropped my tea just that morning. I heard the satisfaction in his voice, the little "I told you so" he didn't have to say. He told me to just hang on, to not try and do too much, that they were working on a solution. I'll bet you are, Thomas, I thought. They were so wrapped up in their own story, the story of the dutiful children managing their difficult, aging mother, that they never saw me. They saw a stereotype, they saw a burden, and I used it. I let them see me struggle to find the remote. I let them watch me forget where I'd put my reading glasses, only to have Brenda find them right on my side table. Every time they did this, they'd exchange that look. The look that said, "See, she's not all there. It's for the best." Their arrogance was my shield. The high point of their little drama came a week after I found the power of attorney. Thomas and Brenda came over for dinner. A family meeting, Thomas had called it. He sat at my table, in the chair Frank always used, and he cleared his throat. He said he and Brenda had been doing a lot of thinking. He explained that they loved me so much, but they just couldn't bear to see me at risk. He slid a glossy brochure across the table. Riverbend. The pictures were all of smiling, gray-haired people playing cards. He told me this wasn't just a home, it was a community. He said they'd already put a deposit down for me to hold a lovely ground-floor apartment. He said it was just a matter of signing the papers and listing the house. Brenda chimed in, her voice syrupy. She said I wouldn't have to worry about a thing. No more cooking, no more cleaning, no more dangerous stairs. I looked at the brochure. I looked at their eager, hungry faces. They looked like two vultures who just spotted a very slow-moving rabbit. I picked up the brochure. I felt the slick, expensive paper. And then I did what they'd been waiting for. I started to cry. Not loud, you understand. Just a few quiet tears. I let my hand tremble. I told them I was so tired. I told them maybe they were right. Maybe it was just too much for me. I told them I just needed to think about it. Oh, the relief on their faces. It was disgusting. Thomas, believing he'd finally won, made his fatal mistake. He leaned in, patting my arm, and told me not to worry, that it was all for the best. He said Mr. Pace, the realtor, was wonderful and would handle everything, and that they'd even hired a specialist, a geriatric care expert, to come by. He said her name was Mrs. Doyle. He explained that she would just do a little safety assessment of the house. He said it was just a formality for the Riverbend application, but it would also help them show anyone who might ask, that this house was no longer a safe environment. He was telling me, in his own clumsy way, that they were building a legal case. They were going to use this expert to have me declared unsafe in my own home. I wiped my eyes. I told him, my voice just a whisper, that if he thought it was best, then okay. They left that night, victorious. They were so sure they'd won. They were so sure I was a beaten, weeping old woman, ready to be packed away. They never once wondered why I'd been writing checks. They never wondered who I'd been calling on Frank's old private landline in the study. They scheduled the assessment with Mrs. Doyle for the next Thursday. They thought they were setting the final trap. They didn't realize they were walking right into mine. They left, and the house felt clean again. The air, which had been thick with their fake concern and sour with their greed, finally cleared. I sat in my chair, not as a victim, but as a general. They had made their move. They had set their date. Thursday. That gave me 1 week. To them, I was a confused old woman who needed a nap. The truth was, I hadn't slept so soundly in months. I had a purpose. The next morning, I didn't fiddle with the stove. I made a pot of Frank's favorite dark roast coffee. I took a sip, black, and I opened my ledger. Not the checkbook Thomas knew about, the one tied to the household account he could see online. No. I opened the passbook for the Home Maintenance Fund. Frank and I started it in 1988 after a winter storm knocked a tree onto the porch. He said a house like this, a house that's meant to last generations, needs its own nest egg. We put money into it every month for 30 years, and after he passed, I just kept going. It was a separate account, at a separate bank, an account Thomas had no idea existed. He thought I was house poor. He thought I was sitting on a pile of bricks I couldn't afford. He forgot that I am, and always have been, the one who balanced the books. My first call was not to a lawyer. It was to Henderson and Sons. Old Mr. Henderson, the father, had built our original deck in 1979. His son, a man in his 50s now, answered. I told him, Jim, this is Alice Sinclair. I have a problem, and I need a solution, and I'm paying in cash. When he arrived an hour later, I didn't waste time. I didn't tell him the whole sordid story. You don't air your family's dirty laundry, you just deal with the stain. I pointed to the main staircase. This is a danger, I said, using their own words. I need a chairlift, the best one you have. Then I took him upstairs to the master bath. This tub, I said, tapping the porcelain, is a death trap. I want it gone. I want a walk-in shower with a seat and bars everywhere. Jim Henderson looked at me, looked at the house, and started scratching his chin. He told me, Mrs. Sinclair, I'd love to help, but this is a 4-week job. The permits, the ordering. I held up my hand. I don't have 4 weeks, Jim. I have until Wednesday. Next Wednesday. He started to laugh, but he stopped when he saw my face. Jim, I said, my voice quiet. Frank trusted your father. He said he was a man who knew how to solve a problem, not just look at it. I need this done by Wednesday, and I will pay you double your usual rate, plus a bonus if it is. I opened the passbook and showed him the balance. His eyes went wide. He wasn't looking at a frail old lady anymore. He was looking at a client. I'll have to call in every favor I have, he said, the gears already turning in his head. Then you'd better start calling, I said. For the next 6 days, this house was a whirlwind. Thomas would call, and I'd let the phone ring. When I finally picked up, I'd sound breathless, tired. I told him I was just so overwhelmed and not up for visitors. He was delighted. He told me to rest, to save my energy, that this was why they were handling things. He said he'd see me on Thursday with Mrs. Doyle. He thought my breathlessness was weakness. He had no idea it was from the noise of 3 carpenters ripping out my bathroom. He thought the house was silent, but it was the sound of my defense being built, nail by nail, screw by screw. The sound of the electrician wiring the lift, the sound of the tile setter. Jim Henderson was a miracle. He was in and out every day, his crews working like they were liberating a city. They were loud, they were dusty, and they were the most beautiful sight I had ever seen. By Wednesday evening, it was done. The check I wrote him would have given Thomas a heart attack. But it was my money, my and Frank's money, saved for this very purpose, to protect our home. The house was quiet again. The dust had been vacuumed. The stair lift sat gleaming on its track. The bathroom. Well, it looked like a spa. They were coming on Thursday to inspect a house they believed was a trap. They had no idea I had just turned it into a fortress. The renovations were done. The house was a fortress. But I've lived long enough to know that a strong wall doesn't mean much if you've already got a traitor inside the gates. And I had too. My son and that fraudulent piece of paper he was clutching. That power of attorney. All the new railings and walk-in showers in the world wouldn't matter if Thomas could wave that document and claim I was mentally unfit to use them. He was bringing his expert Mrs. Doyle to prove just that. He was coming to get a professional opinion that would back up his story. I was strong. My house was safe. But he had a piece of paper that said I was incompetent. I had to fight the paper. I went back to Frank's study. I sat at his desk and I pulled out my oldest address book, the one from 1985, bound in blue leather. I didn't need a lawyer. I needed an old friend who was a lawyer. I found the number for Arthur Harrison. Arthur and I had served on the library board together for 20 years. He was 82, sharp as a tack, and had absolutely no patience for fools. I called him. I didn't cry. I didn't sound frail. I just told him, "Arthur, this is Alice Sinclair. I have a family matter that has become a legal one, and I need your counsel. It involves a power of attorney signed under duress." He was at my house in an hour. I gave him a cup of tea and I told him everything. The lake house, the disappear comment, the realtor. And I showed him the POA. Arthur read it, his face getting tighter and tighter. He looked up, over the rim of his glasses. He told me that what my son had done was, in his professional opinion, despicable. He said we could fight it, that my signature, obtained in a hospital while I was medicated, was a classic case of undue influence. But he warned me, a legal fight would be long, it would be ugly, it would be expensive, and it would be exactly what Thomas and Brenda wanted. They wanted me to be tied up in a messy fight, proving I was stressed and overwhelmed. "This Mrs. Doyle," Arthur said, tapping the POA. "This is the linchpin, Alice. They are bringing her here to create a report that supports this document. They want her to write that you are at risk, confused, unable to manage. With her report, this piece of paper becomes a weapon they can take to a judge for a full conservatorship. We have to discredit her before she even speaks." "How?" I asked. "It's my word against a so-called expert." Arthur smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who had seen it all. He said, "You don't fight an expert's opinion with your opinion, Alice. You fight it with a better expert's opinion." He made a call. 2 hours later, a woman named Dr. Lena Washington was standing in my foyer. She was not a geriatric care specialist. She was a geriatrician and a forensic neuropsychologist, a world-class expert on aging, cognition, and elder abuse. I didn't play the weak old woman for her. I was all business. I told her the truth. I showed her the POA. I showed her my ledgers from the last 3 years, perfectly balanced. I showed her the new renovations and the checks I wrote to pay for them from my private fund. She spent 2 hours with me, She didn't just look at the house. She looked at me. She gave me cognitive tests. She asked me about my budget, my medications, my investments. At the end, she sat at my dining room table, her briefcase open. She told me, "Mrs. Sinclair, your cognitive scores are in the 98th percentile for your age. You are managing a complex household and budget with zero deficits. The fact that you orchestrated these renovations in under a week, frankly, it's astonishing." She looked at the POA. "This," she said, her voice cold, "is financial and emotional abuse. It's an attempted theft of your autonomy, cloaked in the language of concern." She pulled out a notepad. She started to write, and write, and write. She didn't just give me advice, she gave me an arsenal. She wrote a full, notarized, 6-page neuropsychological evaluation and in-home safety assessment. It detailed my superior cognitive function. It documented my proactive and highly effective home modifications. It concluded, in ironclad medical language, that I was exceptionally capable and demonstrably independent, and that my home was a model of safe, adapted living. She handed me the sealed, stamped report. "This," she said, "is not an opinion. It's a medical and legal finding. The moment this Mrs. Doyle of theirs steps out of line, you hand this to her. You give a copy to your son. Let them see what a real expert has to say." I had my walls. Now I had my sword and shield. Wednesday evening. The house was quiet. All the work was done. The sawdust was gone. The faint smell of new grout and fresh paint had faded. I'd walked through my home. I'd seen the gleaming rails of the chairlift, polished and silent. I'd stood in the master bath, which was now a masterpiece of safety and comfort. It was a fortress. But a fortress is just a building. The battle is won by the general. I was sitting in the parlor, the account book for the maintenance fund open on my lap. The balance was much lower, but it was the best money I'd ever spent. Dr. Washington's sealed report was on the side table, next to a picture of Frank. I felt calm, ready. The phone rang, the landline. I picked it up. It was Brenda. Her voice was different, not the sugary, condescending tone she'd been using. This was a new voice. It was thin, nervous. She said she was just calling to check in, to see how I was feeling about the meeting tomorrow. I told her I was feeling perfectly fine. There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing. Then the words came tumbling out. She said Thomas was just so stressed, that work was a nightmare, and that this whole situation was just so hard on him. She said they were only doing this because they cared so much. I didn't say anything. I just let her talk. She was winding herself up, justifying. And then, the real reason for her call. Her voice dropped. She asked me if I was sure I didn't just want to sign the papers for Riverbend. She said she'd found a lovely set of curtains for the apartment and that the deposit was non-refundable after Friday. I finally understood. She was weak. She wasn't a general. She was just a camp follower. Thomas was driven by greed, yes, but also by some dark, impatient need to be in charge, to be the man of the house. Brenda just wanted the lake house. She was in this for the curtains, and she was nervous. She was calling to see if I would just give in, so they wouldn't have to do anything ugly. She didn't have the stomach for the fight, only for the spoils. "Brenda," I said, my voice as calm and clear as a bell. "I am not worried about the deposit. I will see you, Thomas and Mrs. Doyle, at 10 o'clock tomorrow. Good night." I hung up. I knew then that I had already won. They were not a united front. They were a bully and a coward. I went to the study. I took out the thick leather folio that Frank used for his architectural drawings. I placed inside it the original 1988 paperwork for the maintenance fund. I placed the canceled checks and paid in full invoices from Henderson and Sons. I placed my original notarized 2010 will. And right on top, I placed the 6-page, ironclad, expert report from Dr. Lena Washington. I went to bed early. I didn't sleep in the guest room downstairs. I took my new chairlift up to my own bedroom, in my own house. They were coming tomorrow to put an end to my life here, to declare me incompetent and this house a danger. They didn't know they were coming to my party, and I had all the proof I needed to send them home. At 10 o'clock on the dot, the doorbell rang. I was sitting in the parlor, not in my recliner, but in the good wingback chair, the one with the straight back. I wanted to be upright when they arrived. I had the leather folio on the table beside me. I heard Thomas's key in the lock. That was another thing that would have to change. He and Brenda came in first, followed by a woman in a gray suit carrying a clipboard. This had to be Mrs. Doyle. She looked efficient, and, if I'm being honest, she looked like she'd already made up her mind. Thomas led the way, all false concern. He rushed over, telling me I shouldn't have gotten up, that they would have come to me. Brenda just hovered by the door, twisting the strap on her purse. "Mother, this is Mrs. Doyle," Thomas said, gesturing. "She's the geriatric care expert I told you about. She's just going to look around, for your safety." Mrs. Doyle stepped forward and gave me a tight, professional smile. She said it was a pleasure to meet me, that she just needed to ask a few questions and see the layout. Thomas, of course, couldn't wait. He took over immediately. He started in the foyer, pointing to the oriental rug. He told Mrs. Doyle that it was a major trip hazard, but that I was just too sentimental to get rid of it. Then, he turned to the main event, the staircase. "And this, Mrs. Doyle," he said, his voice dropping into that serious, concerned tone. "This is our biggest worry. It's just not safe. My mother is so stubborn, she refuses to admit she can't be climbing these. One more fall. Well, she simply cannot live here anymore." He looked at me, expecting me to argue, expecting the frail, confused old woman. I smiled. "You're right, Thomas. The stairs were a problem." I reached over to the wall beside my chair. I pressed a small, discreet button. From the top of the landing, there was a soft whirring sound. A brand-new, top-of-the-line chairlift began its silent, smooth descent down the polished track. I have never, in my 80 years, seen a man's jaw literally drop. But Thomas's did. His face went from concern to confusion to pure, sputtering disbelief in about 3 seconds. Brenda just made a small, strangled noise. "Mrs. Doyle." Mrs. Doyle just raised an eyebrow and made a note on her clipboard. "It was installed on Tuesday," I said calmly. "It's quite comfortable." Thomas found his voice. It was high-pitched. He asked who paid for it, how I— "Oh, I'm not done," I said. I pushed myself up with my cane. "Please, Mrs. Doyle, let's continue the tour." Thomas was also very worried about the bathroom. I walked, slowly but steadily, to the chairlift. I sat down, pressed the button, and glided right past my gaping son. I got off at the top. They all trudged up the stairs behind me. Brenda looked like she was being led to her own execution. I led them to the master bath. Where the old, treacherous porcelain tub had been, there was now a beautiful, gleaming walk-in shower. All tile and glass. A built-in teak seat. Polished chrome safety bars, exactly where they needed to be. This time, Thomas didn't even speak. He just stared. "Brenda, you were right," I said, turning to her. "It's so much safer. I was so worried about slipping. But the cost." Thomas finally stammered. "Mom, you can't. You couldn't have afforded this." I led them back downstairs. I sat in my chair. I picked up the leather folio. "You're right," I said. "I couldn't have afforded it with the household account, the one you have access to." I opened the folio. I took out the 1988 passbook for the Home Maintenance Fund. "Frank and I started this the year you went to college, Thomas, for this house, a fund you knew nothing about." I laid out the paid-in-full invoices from Henderson & Sons. "I didn't just fix the problems, Mrs. Doyle," I said, turning to the woman in the gray suit who was now watching me, not the house. I was forced to adapt, because my son and his wife aren't worried. They're impatient. "Mom!" Thomas boomed. "I heard you," I said, and my voice cut right through his. "I was right here. I heard you tell Brenda you wished I would just disappear. I heard her say I was being selfish and keeping you from your lake house." Brenda turned a shade of gray I'd never seen before. Thomas's face was purple. "You didn't want me safe," I said, my voice like ice. "You wanted me gone. You tried to make me a prisoner in my own home, moving my things, hiding my mail, trying to prove I was fragile." I took out the last document, the report from Dr. Lena Washington. "You brought Mrs. Doyle here to write a report," I said, handing the sealed document to her. "You wanted her to say I was confused, at risk, incapable. You wanted to use her good name to back up your lies." I looked at Thomas. "You wanted to use it to validate that fraudulent power of attorney you had me sign in the hospital." Mrs. Doyle's head snapped up. She broke the seal on the report and began to read. We all sat in silence. The only sound was the click of the grandfather clock in the hall. She read all 6 pages. She read the cognitive scores. She read the diagnosis of superior function. She read the expert validation of my home modifications. She read the legal finding of attempted financial abuse. She put the report down. She closed her clipboard. She stood up. She didn't look at me. She looked at Thomas. She told him, in the coldest, most professional voice I've ever heard, that her assessment was concluded. She told him that based on the evidence, Mrs. Sinclair's home was not just safe, it was a model of proactive adaptation. She told him that any attempt to declare me incompetent would be, in her words, a frivolous and malicious legal action, and that she would be forced to file a report with Adult Protective Services against him. She thanked me for my time, advised me to have a wonderful day, and walked out the front door. And I was left in the parlor with my son and his wife. The silence in that room was absolute. They had nothing, no threats, no leverage, no expert, just their own ugly greed hanging in the air between us. They didn't say a word. Brenda just started to cry. Those awful, silent, selfish tears. Not tears for what she had done, but tears for what she had just lost. The lake house, the curtains, it all just evaporated. Thomas. His face was a terrible thing to see. It was dark red, the veins standing out on his neck. He looked at me, not with remorse, but with a cold, pure hatred. He hated me. He hated me for not being weak. He hated me for not disappearing. He knew he was beaten. He knew I had outsmarted him, outplanned him, and outpaid him. He had come to my house to claim it, and he had been thrown out by a little old lady with a checkbook and a spine. Brenda, sobbing, grabbed her purse and practically ran out the front door. Thomas lingered for just a second. He looked at the chairlift. He looked at me. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't say anything. He just turned, his shoulders stiff, and pulled the front door shut behind him. He didn't slam it. It was a cold, final click. The moment that door clicked, I let out the breath I felt I'd been holding for 6 months. The silence that filled the house this time was different. It wasn't the silence of betrayal. It was the silence of victory. It was the sound of my house, my home, breathing a sigh of relief with me. I sat there for a long time. I looked at Frank's picture. I told him, "Well, Frank, we took care of that." My first call was not to a friend. It was to a locksmith. Within an hour, every lock on this house was new. The key Thomas had used was just a useless piece of metal now. That felt good. My second call was to Arthur, my lawyer. I told him what had happened. I heard him chuckle, a dry, papery sound. He said he'd rarely heard of a cleaner victory. We started the work immediately. We filed the revocation of that awful power of attorney. We filed a new one, naming Arthur as my proxy, but only if I am on my deathbed and 2 doctors, including Dr. Washington, agree. Not a moment before. And then we discussed the will. Thomas, you see, wanted to inherit a house. He was so impatient for it, he tried to steal it while I was still living in it. He will not be inheriting this house. The house, Frank's legacy, will be placed in a trust to be managed by the Historical Society. It will be preserved just as he designed it. My son wanted to sell it for a quick payday. Instead, it will stand for another 100 years as a reminder of what real quality, real craftsmanship looks like. As for Thomas, I left him precisely $1, enough to make it clear he was not forgotten. He was disinherited, a final lesson in the value of things. But this was never really about the money, or even about the house. It was about me. They looked at me at 80 years and saw an ending. They saw a problem to be managed. They saw a woman who was done. They did not see a woman who had lived through 8 decades of history, who had raised 2 children, buried a husband, balanced a budget, and survived. This is the final twist, isn't it? The one they never see coming. They think old means weak. They think frail means foolish. They forget that with age comes a wisdom that is forged, not given. It's a wisdom that knows how to wait, how to watch, and how to fight. I am not starting over. That's a young person's game. I am continuing, I am 80 years old, and I am starting this new dawn, in my own home, on my own terms. My hip is still weak, yes, but my spine is pure steel. I am not going anywhere. I wanted to tell this story. I had to. Because I know I am not the only one. I know there are others out there, feeling invisible, feeling like their own families are just waiting. If this story touched you, I would be so honored to know. I'd love to know where you're watching from, where my story has landed. Please drop your city in the comments below. It would mean the world to an old woman to see how far her voice can travel. And I ask you to subscribe. Not for my sake, but for the sake of these stories. Because every grandmother, every older person, has a tale that needs to be told. We have seen it all, and we have learned, and we are so much stronger than they think.